We're here at the Web 2.0 Summit here in San Francisco. With me is Danny Weitzner. Danny is, let's see if I get this right, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Internet Policy.
Bingo.
Wow, okay. Are we done now?
That says it all.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty large portfolio, even though you're in this specific office. What can, in the context of an increasingly global internet, the White House do in the context of internet policy that is going to actually come home to the more than 1 billion citizens that are on it?
Well, you know, we've been incredibly lucky in the last 15 years of the growth of the internet. It started from essentially nothing to something that has grown faster than any other communications medium in history. It's brought, obviously, incredible commercial benefits, but beyond that, it's brought benefits for our educational system. It's helped advance science. It's helped advance democracy in really important ways. In many ways, the starting point for us as an administration with the internet was the recognition of how central the web was to the Obama campaign. Here was a candidate who was decidedly not a front runner, who in a very real sense may not have even been noticed as a serious candidate, but for the help that he got from this incredible decentralized, agile network of supporters on the web. Of course, he had to get elected by real voters, real people in real polling booths, but starting from that sense on the campaign of how transformative the internet can be, as we shaped our policy platform, we looked very hard at how we could use the innovative potential of the internet environment to achieve key national policy goals. So we're dependent on the internet to help with things like healthcare reform. If doctors can have better access to their patients' information, if we can get research on what kinds of treatments are more effective across a wide population on closer to a real-time basis, we can lower costs, increase quality, and provide innovative new treatments. And the list goes on and on. For us, the internet is a central part of innovation in the 21st century. We're very lucky to be able to be working with governments all around the world on issues from open government, ways to use the internet to open up government information and increase democratic participation, all the way to dealing with some of the hardest public policy issues like cybersecurity, consumer online privacy, copyright protection, global free flow of information. So we have a big agenda, and certain sense we couldn't do it without the internet. Conferences like this show you know, how you can use all these different media outlets to get the word out, to get people interacting, and we're dependent on that kind of energy to get results.
And the president has famously been going direct through the internet, right? Through whitehouse.gov, which has been upgraded using open source platforms, through social media. He's the most followed politician on the planet on Twitter, certainly a huge following on Facebook, going right to YouTube, mobile devices, you name it, all those different ways. But that's all communication. And it's not to discount the power of that, but you mentioned one specific example of being able to impact healthcare. So for people watching, something called the Direct Project, right, made it possible through a public-private partnership to transmit health information securely online. That actually was not growth of an open government process. It's a good example of a quiet policy win that doesn't get as much attention as a tweet. Right. What other examples can you offer of substantive infrastructure improvements, and what have been a couple failures?
I'll give you one example in the policy realm in health information technology. One of the really interesting technology developments in the whole health information technology field is a development called personal health record systems. So many of the Silicon Valley companies are experimenting with systems that give individuals the ability to collect all their health information, put it in one place, make sure they can understand it and analyze it, make sure that their doctors, wherever they are, have access to it. Well, there's a quirk in the health privacy laws that we have on the books today that actually leaves that data unprotected under our current privacy statutes. And details about why it's unprotected aren't that interesting, except to say that the statute was written in the late 90s before anyone even ever thought about what a personal health information system might really be. So the privacy protections were left out we could have gone back to Congress and said, you got to fix this statute. We could have had years and years of debate about what it ought to look like. We could have hoped that Congress would have acted, which they sometimes seem to have trouble doing these days. Instead, what we did is the Health and Human Services Agency went and worked with the developers of these personal health record systems, worked with privacy advocates, and worked with regulators at the Federal Trade Commission to develop what we call an enforceable code of conduct to protect the privacy of health information in these personal health record systems. This was done in a matter of months as opposed to years. And it's effective now, it's in place, people have real privacy protections that they wouldn't otherwise have. And even though Congress didn't actually pass a law to give people legal protection, people have legal recourse because they can go to the Federal Trade Commission if they feel their privacy rights were violated, if they feel that that code of conduct that the personal health record system operators committed to, somehow they didn't live up to it. So that's an example of an innovation in the policy creation process where we can develop new systems, new business models, new styles of interacting with information, and very quickly develop a policy about how the information ought to be handled and have it be enforceable and give people a sense of confidence and trust that they can actually use these systems and their rights will be protected. Do we have a failure? I'm not willing to admit to a failure yet on our initiatives. But look, what I think that we have is we have the challenge in the health information technology space, in the smart grid space, in the educational records environment, where we're trying to get more flexible, agile, frictionless use of information in all those contexts. And we're living with a lot of older data structure standards, a lot of older ways of handling data, and you mentioned the Direct project as an example of a way to cut through some of the more clunky standards that are now providing us the new approach provide us better security, easy to implement security as opposed to some of the older standards. We're still dealing with a large number of somewhat more mainframe, large enterprise-oriented standards where really what we need are standards that can be implemented on a lightweight basis on smaller scale apps in a more of a web context. So we've got a lot of those to work through, and we need help in doing all that.
Sure, a lot of Washington's still in COBOL, whereas the web's running on Python and Ruby, right?
That's right.
Along those lines?
Python, it's already old hat, right? I mean, we're on to HTML5.
Well, getting there. Parts of the government are on HTML5, I gather.
Right.
Houselive.gov now will default to that if I call it up on my iOS device. That just turned on. So there are pockets of innovation if you keep looking for them. The challenge I see as I look at this space, especially in your particular world, the internet policy world, is that you can see where some of the tools that are out there, some of the platforms that are out there, can have dual uses. For instance, the idea that, yes, social networking platforms can connect people, but they can also make it possible for people in different states to, say, crowdsource identification of protesters, or to track their IP devices to find a local blogger, et cetera. As you look towards the way that the internet is developing around the world, since a lot of these different technologies have now become associated with a more democratic, free system of government, do you think there's a risk that we're going to see an increasingly balkanized internet? And in which case, what should we be thinking about that? What can you do about it?
Well, you raise a great question, which is how are we going to address the privacy questions of this increasingly large volume of personal information is out there where it's hard to think of an aspect of our lives where there isn't data recorded about it somewhere or another, and how do we address privacy questions? 20 years ago, privacy questions tended to be pretty simple. It was about government wiretapping a voice telephone line, or it was about some marketers who were calling you at home at night or sending you direct mail you didn't want to receive. Those questions look kind of pedestrian compared to the challenges we face today. How to deal with location information, how to deal with health information in its increasingly complex and interconnected forms. And so how do we address the complexity? Because really the environment that we're heading towards is an environment where, as someone I used to work with, Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web, characterized the goal of the web in a lot of ways as representing everything that was going on in the world. There were people who worked with Tim and myself who would say, if it's not on the web, it doesn't exist. And what that means is that people really, I think a lot of people who are developing apps of all kinds, of developing web services, want to help people manage information about themselves, about the world out there. That means we're going to represent more and more of what's out there, more and more of what's going on. We've made, I think one of the things that we've learned about looking at privacy in particular is that you can't think about privacy anymore as being just about secrecy. There was a period of time when information flows were simpler and you could think about privacy as just trying to keep data away from anyone else. If you could keep it secured in your own little personal computer off the grid, that was somehow private, and the minute it got anywhere else, all of a sudden it wasn't private. Now, the world's a lot more complicated actually, because as we've heard in this conference, people want to share information in all different kinds of ways, but we reject the view that simply because you've shared information in one place, it means you think it should be public everywhere. Simply because you've shared pictures with your friends or made available your health information to your doctor or maybe to some researchers, it doesn't mean you're happy to have it plastered all over the web. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're willing to have it used out of context, say to make a decision about whether to hire you for a job or whether to approve you for a loan. So we're going to have to get a lot more subtle about how we understand privacy protection. I think in particular, we're going to have to start paying attention to the context in which personal information is collected and used. I think that people who run social networks make a good point that once you step into a social network context, it's reasonable to think that you expect your information will flow around in that context. But if it gets taken out of that context and used for some different purpose, then you have reason to feel possibly violated, feel that your rights were infringed. So we have a long process of sorting out all of these questions. We feel confident that the privacy framework that we've been developing over the last 2 years will enable us to develop specific answers to specific kinds of personal information uses and make sure that once there are commitments made about those kinds of information that they're actually enforceable, that people feel they have legal rights that can be protected.
So legal rights that could be protected, it's a good entree into another issue. As you know, sometimes what's happening in Washington seems pretty unrelated to what's going on in the rest of the country. When it comes to matters of tech policy, though, what's happening there can actually impact what's happening here quite a bit. There are a number of issues that have already come up at the conference. Senator Wyden talked about the Protect IP Act. Can you talk a little bit about what intermediary liability is and what some of the tech policy issues that are currently being discussed in Washington are, and why the larger tech community and citizens should care enough to actually show up and talk about them?
It's a great question. The internet is nothing if not a series of, as you said, intermediaries. It's services that help us get data from one place to another. It's services that help us analyze data, that help us find data, whether they're search engines or internet service providers or platforms like social networks. The internet works not just as a set of purely, as some say, dumb pipes, but it also works because it's got a number of entities in the middle between you and the data you're looking for that helps you get there, or that helps you process it, or that helps you pay for the thing you want to buy, that helps you find the song you're looking for, that helps you store the picture you want your family to see, whatever it is. These are all the intermediaries who spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort to make sure that they can make these functions easy for the individual user. So the question always comes up, if an intermediary is handling information that has some legal problem associated with it, if it infringes someone's copyright, if it violates someone's privacy, if it's stolen in some way, who's responsible? Is it the intermediary who helped you find the information or who stored the information, or is it just you who used the information contrary to law? We have in the U.S. Legal system a really important balance that we've struck there. We've said that generally intermediaries are not responsible for third-party content. That is, if I run a social network and you post a message that is insulting and defamatory to some other person, as long as I don't have any involvement in the creation of that message, the liability is with you, not with me, because I'm just the platform. I'm kind of like the public library that hosts all these things. The liability stays at the ends of the system. There's sometimes, though, when we've made decisions, for example, in copyright law, that if a company is hosting infringing content, the right holder, the entity that owns the copyright, can send a note to the platform, to the intermediary, and say, this violates my copyright, take it down.
The DMCA
The DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Yep.
And I think that what we've learned, I will say that the DMCA was greeted in the online civil liberties community in the late 90s when it first came out as a horrible thing that was going to end the internet as we know it. What we actually learned is that it's a pretty balanced system, that it is an environment that allows intermediaries to keep information flowing through their systems, which is what we want. But it also allows rights holders, when they find evidence of specific copyright infringement, to have that material taken down. The challenge that we have today is that some of the intermediaries are outside of the reach of U.S. law, and this is the issue in the Protect IP Act. On the one hand, we feel very strongly as an administration that we want to be able to protect the intellectual property rights of U.S. companies, whether the infringement happens in the U.S. or around the world. On the other hand, we don't want to create a situation where we compromise security or unnecessarily limit the free flow of information in the process of trying to protect those rights. So Congress is having a really active debate about how to balance that right, how to make sure that we have effective global intellectual property enforcement, while at the same time making sure that the openness of the internet is protected.
So, how much are you talking with other members of the White House about these ICE takedowns, right? I mean, you've been online for a long time. You've got some sense of the growth of policies, and certainly know that the pace of internet innovation tends to be well ahead of the laws and regulations that cover it. You can see some of the moves that the FTC has made for Google or Twitter. The ICE takedowns of websites that have started occurring last November have caught the attention of a lot of people in the internet community because they've used the domain name system to take a website offline. And these are websites which have hosted infringing content generally, not necessarily the intermediary like YouTube per se, but a site which is pointing to lots of pornography or pirated materials. But there's no law on the books which supports that happening per se, from what a lot of scholars tell me. So to what extent are these
I will say,
discussions
so I have certain boundaries here. ICE,
Okay.
which is the Customs Service, what people know as Customs Service, polices our borders, and among other things is responsible to make sure that illegal content is stopped at the border, isn't imported. These are law enforcement matters. They make decisions about who to prosecute, who not to prosecute. At the White House, we don't get involved at all in those decisions. They actually are acting under existing legal authority. They have the ability to seize the domain name itself. They actually can't, under the law, or the way they've used the law, they haven't actually been seizing the website itself, because often that's outside the United States. What they actually do is seize the name, the domain name. And the good news there is that that's a process that's all done under the supervision of courts. When ICE wants to seize a domain, they have to go to court. They have to say, we have evidence that there's a crime committed here. It has to meet a certain standard. The entities whose names have been seized have the opportunity to show up in court and contest that seizure at some point. Some of them are doing that now. We're going to have that out in the courts and see what happens. And I think this is what's really important in the internet environment, is to make sure that we have that kind of transparency and due process. Countries all over the world have laws that they need to enforce. It's their obligation to enforce laws. There was a brief period of time where there was some sense that the internet was going to be this kind of law-free zone, or it's going to make its own rules, or nothing bad was going to happen, or there was some version of rosy reality. But for all the great things that happen on the internet, there's also criminal activity. Governments have an obligation to protect us from that criminal activity. The key is to make sure that they do it in a way, as I said, that where there's real transparency to how it's done, where there's due process, so that those who are affected can challenge government action, and also to make sure that it's globally scalable. You look around, particularly this part of the country, at the incredible array of services and products that are created, that are offered online through the web. We don't want entrepreneurs who are offering a great new service on the web to have to go and figure out how to comply with 194 now different laws. That would clearly have a huge negative impact on the growth of the internet economy. So we're looking for ways to make sure that there can be a rule of law, but that it's easy to comply with the rules as they exist all around the world.
So, last question, and this is more of a universal one. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has advanced this internet freedom agenda, which has been controversial in some quarters and others celebrated, depending upon people's view. The phrase that has come up there, here and there, has been a right to connect, right? And there have been other declarations internationally which have kind of hailed the internet as a public square for our time. This idea that being disconnected from that is a violation of your human rights, right? Is there such a thing as a online Bill of Rights that exists beyond ours, or even based upon our own, that should be extended around the world? Is this a policy that can be extended online now that we're so universally connected to each other? Is a right to connect something that you and your colleagues support?
Secretary Clinton, I think, is acting in the greatest traditions of the State Department in supporting and extending and extolling basic human rights values. I think that when Secretary Clinton talks about the right to connect, she's talking about the right of freedom of expression, the right of free press, the right to receive and impart information. These are rights that are written into international human rights commitments that we've signed, that almost every country in the world has signed. The internet brings a whole bunch of questions about how to make those rights real in this new environment. But I don't think the fundamentals of the rights themselves change, and I don't think she's suggesting that they change. I think what she's really saying, and she's said it herself very well, is that the internet is an extraordinary platform for the advancement of human rights, and that it's up to all of us, countries, companies, individuals, organizations that care about human rights, to make sure that we're using the internet to its fullest, and that we're avoiding any barriers to the free flow of information that are avoidable. So that's the right to connect. It's about the best of our human rights traditions internationally brought to the internet environment.
Okay. Well, I think collective responsibility is probably a good place to leave things in the context of Web 2.0 Summit, when so many people are thinking about what we all hold in our hands. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.